Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the girl Archie met in Tangier. It was raining hard enough to make Manhattan look honest for once. The kind of grey, lopsided rain that scrubbed the soot off the lampposts and made every cabbie believe he was navigating the sticks. I was standing at our front window watching the gutter try to swallow a week's worth of cigarette ends when the bell rang. 3 short, 1 long. Fritz never used that pattern unless it meant something urgent, or the butcher was short on veal. I opened the door to find him holding a yellow telegram envelope at arm's length, as if it might detonate and ruin the morning's menu. The wax seal was damp and streaked, and a curl of steam rose from his shoulders where his coat had taken the worst of the weather. "Telegram, Archie," he said, rolling the word as though it were a bad ingredient. "For you, from overseas." Overseas. I took it, tore it open, and read something that made my spine forget about posture. They followed me to New York. Tell the fat man I'll pay anything. Noon, Hotel Luxor. Lydia. I must have gone still long enough for Fritz to clear his throat. "A friend?" he asked carefully. "You could call it that," I said. "Once, 6 months back in Tangier. Army business that turned into an education in cocktails." He gave me that patient continental look that meant I'd said too much already, and vanished kitchenward with his sense of moral superiority intact. I walked into Wolfe's office with the telegram in hand. He was ensconced behind the desk, reading the Times and chewing a thought instead of breakfast. The office smelled like beer faintly remembered, and orchids waiting upstairs for their 4 o'clock attentions. "Good morning, sir," I said, or at least it was until romance crawled through the mail slot. He grunted without looking up. "If that is your idea of levity before I have finished the editorials, I shall withdraw to the plant rooms immediately." "Don't panic. It's not my levity, it's hers." I handed him the telegram. He unfolded it with the suspicion of a man unsealing an indictment. His eyes moved once down the lines and then up at me, slowly, like a submarine periscope catching sight of a destroyer. "Lydia Marin," I offered. "Met her in Tangier while serving as unpaid courier for one of your clients. The lady had charm, cheekbones, and a knack for bad company. I helped her dodge a customs inspector. She bought me a drink, and that was that. Until now." "Pfui." He set the telegram flat on the blotter. "Women who import calamity are the most industrious exporters in the world. What is the hour of this appointment?" "Noon, Hotel Luxor." "And the current time?" 9:45. "Then you will go alone. I have orchids to mist and you have impulses to indulge." That was his way of saying he wanted nothing to do with it, which meant he wanted to know everything before dinner. I pocketed the telegram. "Fine, but if she offers a retainer larger than Fritz's grocery budget, I'll make sure it arrives before your dessert." That earned a rumble halfway between a harumph and a prayer for civilization's end. At 11:30, Manhattan was a jungle of umbrellas. I caught a cab at 35th and watched rain slide down the glass like a timeline of bad decisions. The Luxor stood at the corner of Lexington, a pre-war monument with marble columns and enough lobby gold leaf to make King Tut blush. Lydia was easy to spot even before she turned. A green dress that pretended not to notice it was winning, a matching hat tilted just enough to whisper Europe, and eyes that had seen too much sand for this latitude. She was sitting on a lobby divan like a cat waiting for either rescue or milk. "You're early," she said when I approached. Her voice carried that slight rasp of the Mediterranean coast, smoke and salt together. Habit. When people say noon in New York, they usually mean whenever the trouble starts. She tried a smile and failed. Her hands were clenched around a damp kid-leather clutch. The Moroccan satchel wasn't in sight. "I wired you because I didn't know who else to trust," she said. "They followed me from Tangier. 2 men, Americans, I think. They want what I left here." "Then you might consider not saying satchel where bellboys have ears." She hugged the clutch tighter. "It's safer with you. I can pay—" "Hold that thought," I said. "My employer's allergic to cash without context. Let's start with what they want." She looked around the lobby as though the potted palms had microphones. Not here. Upstairs, maybe, or whatever she planned to suggest evaporated when the revolving door spun twice too fast. 2 men stepped in, grey hats dripping, coats heavy. They moved like professionals who'd misplaced something valuable. Lydia froze. "That's them," she whispered. "Stay calm," I said, "because that's what you say right before everything stops being calm." They split, one toward the elevator, one toward us. I stood up, blocking his line. He was medium height, pale eyes, and the smile of a man who never waited for change. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "she'll come with us." "She has a prior engagement." "No," Lydia breathed. "Archie." He reached for her wrist. I stepped once to the side, pivoted, and introduced him to the column beside us. His hat stayed on. His dignity didn't. Before the second man could react, Lydia had bolted, past the concierge, out through the revolving door into the curtain of rain. The second man swore and followed. By the time I hit the street, both were gone. Cabs hissed by like sharks under streetlight, and the rain turned everything into reflection. I checked the pavement. No claim check, no paper trail. If she'd stashed anything, it wasn't on her, which was smarter than most moves she'd ever made if she managed to keep it. Back inside, the first man was up and nursing a cheek that would blossom nicely by morning. "You'll regret that," he said. "Maybe," I told him, "but I'll enjoy the wait." He straightened his hat, spat something unprintable, and limped out. I bent to pick up a cigarette stub he'd dropped, a Turkish blend with a silver band, brand stamped in Arabic script. Imported, expensive, and not the kind you found at the corner drugstore. By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe had reclaimed his throne, and Fritz had reclaimed moral order with a lunch that smelled of veal and butter. I hung up my coat, dripping rain onto the rack, and walked into the office where Wolfe was dictating something to his conscience. "Back so soon," he said, without lifting his gaze from a sheaf of invoices. "I assume the lady either perished, married, or fled." "Option 3, with 2 gorillas for company. She's in the wind, and the only thing she left behind was a Turkish cigarette butt worth a week's rent." "How exhilarating," he said dryly. "You have wasted 2 hours and increased our knowledge of nicotine." I tossed the stub onto his blotter. "Before you condemn the evidence, take a look. North African brand. You can't buy them here without smuggling permits. Maybe our friends from Tangier import more than rain stories." That got his attention. His eyes narrowed and his fingers drummed once on the armrest. "Fritz!" he called. Fritz appeared instantly, as though materialized by guilt. "Beer for Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. "A chilled glass. Perhaps hydration will improve his reasoning." "Yes, sir." When Fritz departed, Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You said she offered money." "She did, but she vanished before specifying how much. Considering she wired 500 just for the telegram, my guess is she's got deeper pockets than sense." "Or deeper trouble than pockets," he murmured. "Tangier, you said. That city breeds complexities. Diamonds, drugs, diplomacy, all concealed under the pretense of hospitality. I have read the reports." "You'd like the nightlife," I told him. "No orchids, but the cabaret singers hit notes that could grow their own." He ignored that. "You will locate her, discreetly. Begin with the Hotel Luxor's register and ascertain if she is still a guest or merely a memory. Bring me tangible information or tangible payment." "You're taking the case?" "I'm permitting inquiry," he said. "There is a distinction." Fritz returned with the beer, and Wolfe passed me the telegram again. "Archie," he said, "romantic attachments, however ill-advised, are best concluded before breakfast. Yet you persist in collecting them like autographs." "Sure," I said, lifting the glass. "But they make better stories than your invoices." He snorted, a small, genuine sound, quickly buried under dignity. At the door I paused. "If she turns up alive, what do you want first? The story or the satchel?" "Whichever survives," he said, and closed his eyes, dismissing both me and the weather. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. It was the kind that promised either a flood or a cleansing, and Manhattan hadn't decided which it deserved. I stepped into it, collar up, hat down, and figured Lydia Marin would manage to make the wrong choice before sunset. Tangier had given me sand, gin, and one unfinished conversation. New York was about to supply the sequel. I headed downtown, whistling off key against the storm, and thought that Tangier might grow tangerines, but the trouble it exported was strictly grade A. By the time the rain stopped pretending it might quit, the city smelled like wet ink and old copper. I'd spent the better part of an hour combing the Luxor's lobby for what Lydia had dropped besides my peace of mind. The clerk, who looked like he'd been born behind that desk, swore up and down no lady matching her description had left anything. It took a folded 10-spot and a little charm applied with tongs to make him remember a Moroccan satchel she'd deposited temporarily before noon. They let it out to me against her ticket number after a little persuasion. The leather was still damp and warm, as if the thing had a pulse. I carried it out under my coat. Rain drummed on the cab roof like a persistent creditor. Inside, I tried not to think about the last time I'd seen Lydia's eyes, wide, scared, and vanishing into the downpour. The satchel gave a muffled clink each time we hit a pothole. At 1:50, I was back on West 35th. Fritz opened the door with his usual calm, though his eyebrows went up when he saw what I was carrying. Lunch was at 1, he reminded me, which was Swiss for do not upset the household timetable with corpses or curiosities. I'll be done before dessert, I promised, lying cheerfully. Wolfe was at his desk, as monumental as the furniture that had surrendered around him. The room smelled of raincoats, ink, and the faint ghost of orchids from the morning. He glanced up once, saw the satchel, and sighed. So, the Revenant returns with luggage. Found it at the Luxor cloakroom. She checked it in before she checked out. Spare me your tropes, he said, extending a finger. Open it, and refrain from melodrama. The lock gave after a polite protest. Inside were 3 items, a customs card stamped Tangier, a small brass scarab on a broken chain, and half of a letter written in looping Arabic script. No money, no lipstick, no love notes, just mystery in bulk. I spread them on his blotter like a hand of bad poker. He took up the scarab first, pinching it delicately between thumb and forefinger. The thing was heavy for its size. The brass worked in fine concentric lines and stained darker in the grooves. Egyptian, he murmured, but not recent. Late dynastic imitation, possibly 19th century revival. Observe the engraving on the underside, an ankh flanked by reed motifs. Curious. Tourist junk, I offered. He gave me a look that could sand varnish. You are incapable of distinguishing kitsch from artifact. This piece was stolen 3 months ago from the Vale collection. That made me sit up. Anthony Vale, the banker with the museum wing named after him. Precisely. He reported several items missing, small bronzes, a scarab among them. The matter was hushed, likely because his insurance underwriters are more discreet than honest. Wolfe turned the piece over again. If Miss Marin possessed it, her difficulties were less romantic than criminal. Maybe she found it in a cereal box, I said, but even I didn't believe it. I picked up the torn letter. Arabic's not one of my stronger languages. You read this? Regrettably, no. Theodore Horstmann may recognize the script. He once misspent his youth on excavations near Luxor. The real one or the hotel? He ignored that too. At 2:30, the doorbell rang twice, emphatic enough to vibrate the Venetian blinds. Wolfe looked up at the ceiling as though praying for patience. If that is the butcher, remind him I ordered lamb kidneys. If it is the police, remind them I ordered silence. I went to the hall, expecting either, and got the worse of both. Inspector Kramer, already chewing on an unlit cigar like it had insulted his precinct. He brushed past me with enough water on his coat to irrigate Wolfe's orchids for a week. Good morning, Goodwin. Tell your boss he can stop pretending ignorance. The dame from Tangier turned up. Alive? He shook his head once. East River, Pier 17, pulled out an hour ago. Identification matched a monogrammed bracelet and hotel register confirmation with her effects. I felt that small internal drop you get when the world takes a corner too fast. Hell, I said. She was breathing when I left her. Kramer grunted. A lot of people were once. He followed me into the office without waiting to be announced. Wolfe had already pulled himself a millimetre more erect, which for him was practically standing to attention. Inspector, Wolfe said with the grace of a reluctant host, I had anticipated your arrival, though not so promptly after lunch. You'll eat on time, don't worry, Kramer said, lighting the cigar now that Fritz wasn't there to faint. Your boy here mixed with a corpse again. Miss Marin? Wolfe asked. Yeah. Coroner says drowning, maybe pushed. But get this, the lab found some kind of resin on her hands and clothes. Not tar, not oil. The techs think it's the stuff they use on old artifacts to keep them from crumbling. You know anything about that? Wolfe's eyes half closed. A preservative compound derived from tree resins and beeswax, long employed in mummification replicas and restoration work. Your technicians are correct. Kramer took that as a yes. Then maybe you'll also tell me why a socialite from Tangier gets herself dunked in the river with museum glue on her fingers. I would not presume, Wolfe said. However, you may infer that she was handling something ancient, valuable, and inconvenient. Kramer blew smoke toward the ceiling. That's so. And what's this something? Maybe the toy your partner's been polishing. I slipped the scarab back into the satchel before he could get ideas. Found it in the hotel's cloakroom, Inspector. Filed a report already. He gave me a sideways glare that said he'd check and probably would. Don't get cute, Goodwin. Chain of evidence matters. Sure, I said. I keep mine gold-plated. He turned to Wolfe. Look, I'm not here to fight. You've got connections in the collector crowd. If this thing ties to Vale, fine. But keep your nose out till we get statements. I don't need headlines about your psychic deductions. Your restraint is admirable, Wolfe said evenly. Nevertheless, I shall continue to think. It's a habit I am powerless to abandon. Kramer puffed once, twice, then sighed. Suit yourself. But if Vale's name leaks, the DA will want you on the stand, and I'll be damned if I'll have to swear you in over your dinner plate. That would be a desecration, Wolfe said. For a moment, the only sound was rain ticking against the windows and the hum of Wolfe's refrigerator behind the wall. Then Kramer's voice softened by half a degree. Off the record, Wolfe. You think this Vale's mixed up in it? I think, Wolfe said, that greed decorates itself with culture and occasionally leaves corpses as ornamentation. Kramer nodded once. Yeah, that sounds like him. He ground out the cigar in my ashtray, a civic privilege he enjoyed nowhere else, and trudged to the door. I'll be in touch. Don't leave town, either of you. An unlikely prospect, Wolfe murmured. When the door shut, Wolfe let out a breath through his nose, a sound like a boiler testing pressure. Archie, he said, file a summary of the inspector's statements, with particular emphasis on the resin. We shall need corroboration. I sat at my desk and began typing, the keys clacking against the quiet. You think she was killed for the scarab? Possibly, or for what the scarab represented. Which is, he frowned at the rain, a conduit between eras, an object whose worth is not intrinsic but associative. Men have died for less compelling metaphors. That was Wolfe. Turn a murder into a seminar and a suspect into philosophy. I finished the page and pulled it from the roller. You realize Kramer's going to sit on Vale like a bulldog with indigestion. He will gnaw without result until prodded, Wolfe said. Meanwhile, we shall eat. Fritz. Fritz appeared with the precision of a metronome. Lunch is served, gentlemen. Excellent. Archie, bring the satchel. We shall dine with our relic. We moved to the dining room where roast lamb and Haricot's verts were doing their best to make civilization seem plausible again. Wolfe examined the scarab between bites, muttering once or twice in Latin, which meant the gears were turning. Halfway through dessert, he said, This resin, if it is genuine embalming material, it suggests proximity to a workshop or collection where restoration occurs. Vale maintains such a laboratory in his Fifth Avenue townhouse. And that's where Lydia probably picked it up before someone helped her swim the river, I said. Indeed. You will verify through Mr. Pantzer whether any shipments arrived recently from the Near East Consulate or private museums. Discretion, of course. I nodded. Saul's discretion could make a Trappist look gabby. When lunch was over, Wolfe returned to the office, wiping his mouth with a precision that could have been surgical. He lowered himself behind the desk again and looked at the satchel as though it had volunteered for confession. Archie, he said, human avarice has a peculiar odour. Sweet, resinous, and hard to remove. I fear our Miss Marin was merely its carrier. Yeah, I said, watching the rain start again outside. And it dumped her in the East River for a tip. He reached for the bell cord but paused. Your flippancy masks concern. Sure, I said, but it works better than embalming fluid. He tugged the cord. Somewhere down the hall, Fritz's shoes clicked in answer. Wolfe closed his eyes, ending the discussion and the scene. I leaned back, staring at the satchel, the passport, and the little brass beetle glinting under the desk lamp. Outside, the gutters were overflowing again, dragging yesterday's sins toward the river. Even mummies, I told the empty room, prefer better company than New York water. At 3 o'clock sharp, the rain gave up, and Manhattan came out looking guilty about it. Shafts of light tried to squeeze through the clouds like a politician squeezing through testimony. I was typing up Kramer's report from the morning, 2 pages of facts, 3 of complaint, when the doorbell chimed in that particular tone that meant money-wearing overshoes. From the hall I heard Fritz's low murmur, the one he reserved for visitors who looked too rich to ignore, but too confident to like. He knocked once and appeared at the office doorway, posture perfect, towel still folded over one arm from polishing the silver. "A Mr. Anthony Vale to see Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's brows went up a 1/4 inch. "Vale, phooey." "Show him in, Fritz, and for heaven's sake take the man's coat. Wealth is no excuse for puddles." I cleared the desk of Lydia's satchel and the scarab, sliding them into the cabinet safe before our visitor could memorize them. When Vale entered, he looked like a banker sculpted by someone who didn't like bankers. Tall, trim, hair silver at the temples by either genetics or vanity, and a complexion that had never met public transportation. His suit was charcoal with a whisper of blue, his tie a masterpiece of restraint. Even his umbrella looked expensive. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, extending a gloved hand and withdrawing it, just as Wolfe's eyes made it plain the gesture was unwelcome. "I am told you are the man to see when police incompetence and journalistic hysteria interfere with private matters." Wolfe shut the Times with a thud that sounded like punctuation. "You are informed with startling accuracy. Please sit." Vale sat. He chose the red leather chair opposite Wolfe's desk, the one that squeaks on purpose. I took mine on the side, notebook in hand, because nothing unsettles a man like knowing his words are being written down before he's decided what they mean. "I will come directly to the point," Vale said. "A young woman named Lydia Marin stole an artifact from my private collection last month, a scarab of minor historical value but considerable sentimental worth. I understand it was found in your possession." "That," Wolfe said, "is an exaggeration. It was found in a satchel retrieved by my assistant. Whether it belongs to you or the lady is not yet demonstrated." Vale smiled with the sort of patience that precedes a lawsuit. "Miss Marin is dead. She cannot demonstrate ownership. I can." He drew from his breast pocket a card case and from it a photograph, a studio shot of several small Egyptian bronzes arranged like a jewelry ad. In the centre was a scarab that could have been twin to ours. Wolfe studied it without touching. A fair resemblance, though brass imitations are numerous. "It is unique," Vale said flatly, "and it is mine." "Then I congratulate you," Wolfe murmured. I watched Vale's jaw stiffen. The man wasn't used to audiences that didn't applaud on cue. He opened his attaché, produced a checkbook, and laid it on the edge of Wolfe's blotter as if unveiling Excalibur. "I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 to recover it and ensure any unfortunate publicity is avoided. 10, if you guarantee silence." Wolfe's eyes moved from the checkbook to Vale's face and back again, with roughly the warmth of a microscope examining a microbe. "Sir, my discretion is not purchasable by installment. My retainer for accepting an engagement of uncertain legality is $25,000, payable in advance, non-refundable." Vale blinked once. "That's outrageous." "So is homicide," Wolfe said. I bit back a grin. Vale's mouth tightened as he considered whether to throw the checkbook or the chair. Instead, he uncapped his pen. "You'll have your money tomorrow morning." Wolfe shook his head. "Today, now, or never. You may, of course, employ another investigator. I understand several advertise in the Gazette between fortune-tellers and furriers." Vale's colour rose a shade, matching the leather chair. "You forget yourself, sir." "I forget nothing," Wolfe replied. "You came uninvited, bearing accusation and cash. I infer desperation. If you wish assistance, you must purchase it at my rate. If you wish courtesy, you should practice it yourself." The silence that followed could have chilled champagne. I watched the man's gloved hand twitch, and that's when I saw it. A thin white scar across his left wrist, just above the cuff. It was small, neat, the kind you get from breaking glass or grabbing something sharp. I'd seen the same mark in the photograph of Lydia Marin that the police photographer had left on Wolfe's desk that morning. She'd had a matching cut on her forearm. Partners in blood or coincidence. I didn't know yet, but it made the air taste different. Wolfe noticed my look and, without turning, said, "Archie, You will restrain your curiosity until our guest departs. Which was his gentlemanly way of telling me nice catch. Shut up. Vale rose, snapping the checkbook shut. Very well. You will regret refusing my generosity. I have regretted worse indulgences, Wolfe said. Good day. The man hesitated. For the first time a crack showed in that marble composure. Miss Marin was unstable, he said quickly. If she told you stories about me, lies, they die with her. I trusted her once. She betrayed that trust. He looked at me when he said it, not Wolfe. And there, in that flash of wounded pride, was something colder than grief. I make it a habit, Wolfe said, to believe nothing until it offends logic. Goodwin, see Mr. Vale out. Vale gathered his hat and umbrella. As we moved toward the front hall, he said, low enough for Wolfe not to hear, You seem like a sensible man, Mr. Goodwin. Keep your employer from meddling and you could save yourself trouble. I appreciate the warning, I told him, but around here trouble's part of the furniture. He gave me a look that belonged in a boardroom vote and stepped into the vestibule. The door shut on him like punctuation again. When I came back, Wolfe was already pulling a yellow legal pad toward him. He fears exposure, he said. Not theft, not loss, but revelation. Yeah, I said, dropping into my chair. I caught that. He's sweating something bigger than a beetle. Wolfe nodded absently. The scarab is a symbol, not the prize. Perhaps it ties him to the woman's death, perhaps merely to her company. Either way, he is a fool. That makes two, I said. She trusted him, he trusted money, and both ended up in the drink. He grunted. Archie, locate in my files the correspondence from the Vale Foundation last April. The letter regarding a proposed endowment for the Metropolitan Museum. There may be reference to North African imports. I pulled the folder, flipped through carbon copies until I found it. Here it is. They were arranging a private exhibition, Treasures of the Desert Kingdom, loan items from Tangier, Tunis and Cairo, sponsored by, you guessed it, Anthony Vale. Precisely, Wolfe said, eyes gleaming. So Miss Marin may have been courier, thief or lover, perhaps all three. Kramer's going to love that triangle, I muttered. He may gnaw it later, Wolfe replied. For now, record our visitor's demeanour, arrogance tempered by fear, self-justification without inquiry, and an odour of sandalwood. Sandalwood? I said. From his gloves. The same resin family as that found on Miss Marin's body. Coincidence? Sure, I said. And I'm the king of Egypt. Wolfe allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Your lineage aside, you will prepare a memorandum for Mr. Panzer. I wish Vale's movements shadowed for the next 48 hours. Discretion paramount. I jotted notes. If Saul tails him through that Fifth Avenue crowd, it'll look like a ghost haunting a mirror. Excellent, Wolfe said. Ghosts are invisible, mirrors deceptive, two qualities that describe Mr. Vale admirably. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. That meant the mental gears were engaging, and I might as well oil my typewriter. I started the report, hammering keys while the late sunlight turned the office into gold dust and shadow. After a while I said, You think he'll pay the 25 grand? He will, Wolfe murmured. Men like Vale pay to control narratives, not to discover truths. Then we're selling him ignorance? Temporarily. At 4 o'clock he reached for the bell cord and pulled twice. Fritz appeared as if summoned by alchemy. Beer, Wolfe said. 2 glasses. Mr. Goodwin has earned his. That was new. Fritz blinked but obeyed. I raised an eyebrow. You must be feeling generous. I'm feeling the need for fortification. Our visitor brought with him the odour of predation. It clings. The beer arrived cold, the foam precise. We drank in silence for a minute, listening to the city settle after its rain bath. You noticed the scar? Wolfe asked finally. Couldn't miss it. Same place as Lydia's. Indeed, there are many possible interpretations. Lovers exchanging blood oaths is unlikely but picturesque. I'll take picturesque over dead, I said. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the scarab still lying under the lamp and turned it over with one thick finger. The brass gleamed dully, catching a stray beam of light. Archie, he said softly, civilization is built upon theft refined into ritual. Mr. Vale simply dispenses with the ritual. Yeah, I said, finishing my beer. And when money talks, this guy's voice could melt glaciers. The phone rang at 10:30 the next morning. which wouldn't have been remarkable except that it did so politely. Kramer never called polite unless the storm was already overhead. Wolfe had just come down from the orchids, cheeks pink from humidity and irritation, when I passed him the receiver. "Wolfe's office," I said. "Goodwin speaking." "Put him on," came the growl. It was Kramer, but not the usual sandpaper version. This one had velvet around the edges, which meant explosives under the cloth. Wolfe extended a hand like a Roman emperor granting audience. I passed him the phone. "Yes, Inspector?" His tone could have frosted beer. Pause. Then, "I appreciate the courtesy. Yes, I'm aware of Miss Maren's demise. No, I have no intention of obstructing federal investigations. Indeed? Another?" That last word made his eyebrows climb half a rung. I watched him listen, his fingers tapping once, twice against the blotter. Finally he said, "Your warning is received, Inspector. Good day." He replaced the receiver with a precision that made it feel like he'd just hanged somebody. I leaned on the edge of the desk. "So which agency are we offending today? Treasury, Customs, or the Board of Cultural Virtue?" He scowled. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation, in its present incarnation of maritime vigilance. A second body has been discovered. Male, anonymous, shot twice in the chest near Pier 47. The Gazette's early edition will carry it within the hour." "Pier 47, I said. "That's down by the freight terminals Vale's company leases." He nodded once. "Kramer advises, meaning threatens, that we abstain from interference. He is, of course, aware that his advice will be disregarded." "Of course," I said. "I'll head down there." "Not yet. It is raining again, and you will have lunch first." "Sure. Nothing mixes like gunfire and indigestion." By 1:30 the rain had turned sleetish, sharp enough to sandpaper the nerves. Wolfe had gone into a thoughtful silence, the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or homicide. Fritz served lamb stew. I ate mine, left his untouched, and collected my hat. At 2:15 I was down on the docks where the Hudson looked like lead and smelled worse. The Blue Lantern bar squatted between two warehouses that had given up trying to stand straight. Its sign buzzed blue and drunk against the grey daylight. Inside, the air was equal parts beer, smoke, and maritime despair. A jukebox wheezed out something pretending to be jazz. Saul Panzer sat in the far corner, a paper spread before him like a shield. He looked up, gave me the briefest nod. "Archie," he said when I slid into the opposite chair. His cap dripped once onto the table. Bad news travels faster than ferries. "I'm catching up. You got confirmation on the dead man?" Name was Marty Crawl. Dock clerk with more side hustles than morals. Used to handle customs paperwork for Vale shipping. Shot last night behind Pier 47, wallet gone, but someone left his union card tucked in his sock. That's either sentiment or a signal. "Any cops sniffing around?" "Plenty. Also 2 men asking questions who didn't leave names. Suits, clean shoes, no badges, feds maybe." That'd track with Kramer's warning. Saul folded the paper, leaned closer. Before Crawl got ventilated, he'd been bragging about a new partner in a customs invoice racket. Used a woman's alias, said she had class, foreign accent, good handwriting. The name was Lydia Maren. That made the beer taste flatter. So, she wasn't just running from Vale's temper, she was moonlighting in fraud. "Looks that way. Crawl's notebook's gone, so proof's thin." "Anybody else using her name?" "Funny you ask. The shipping office has a manifest from last month. Same alias signing off on a crate of machinery parts bound from Tangier. Shipment cleared without inspection thanks to Vale's personal authorization." I whistled low. "Machinery, huh? Probably Egyptian hairdryers." Saul didn't smile. "Or statues or gems. Whatever it was, somebody's killing to keep it quiet." We sat a minute, listening to the rain on the awning. Across the bar, a longshoreman was explaining his life's philosophy to a bottle of rye. I ordered coffee to stay respectable. "You see anyone watching you?" I asked. "2 maybe. Outside in a black Buick, pretending they like the view. One's been there since I arrived." I turned slightly and caught the reflection in the cracked mirror behind the bar. Buick, 2 silhouettes, hats forward. No attempt at subtlety. "Federal or freelance, Patron?" I asked. "Could be either. One's too thin for a Fed." "Then we'll give them a show." I stood, tossed a coin, and said loud enough for eavesdroppers, "Thanks for the tip, Panzer. Wolfe will pay double if the trail stays clean. We walked out separately, Saul toward the piers, me toward the nearest alley. The Buick started up slow, then followed me 3 blocks. I led them through puddles big enough for trout, ducked into a pawn shop, and came out the back into another street. When I re-emerged on 12th Avenue, they were gone. Red herring accomplished, and the clock stayed honest. By 4, I was back at the brownstone, dripping enough to drown Fritz's conscience. He produced a towel before a lecture. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "there are simpler ways to water the carpet." "Sure," I said, "but they lack the federal endorsement." Wolfe was in the office with the Gazette already spread open. The headline caught the eye before he did. "Doc killing linked to Tangier trade." He looked up as I came in. "You are wet." "That's one of my gifts." "And followed?" "Once. They lost interest when the scenery stopped cooperating." He nodded, gesturing to the chair. "Report." I ran it down for him. Crawl, the alias, the shipment, the Buick audience. His eyes closed halfway through, which meant he was listening with the full machinery. When I finished, he said, "So, Miss Marin was enmeshed in contraband before her demise, and Mr. Vale's authorization appears on the documents." "Looks that way, but the feds are already poking." "Then we shall avoid competing. We shall merely outperform." I grinned. "You plan to share that with Kramer?" "He will deduce it belatedly, as is his privilege." Fritz entered then, carrying Wolfe's afternoon beer with reverence. The glass fogged in the warmth of the room. Wolfe took a sip, sighed, and reached for the newspaper again. "Observe," he said, tapping the column. "The reporter writes, police sources suggest the slaying may involve rivalry among foreign shipping interests. An ingenious euphemism for ignorance." "Yeah," I said, "and it fills the space nicely between the fashion page and the boxing results." He ignored me, reading on. "Crawl's death precedes federal inspection of a Vale freight vessel scheduled for tomorrow. If smuggling occurred, the evidence may still rest in the hold." "That's assuming the feds don't find it first." "Precisely. Therefore, we must determine the nature of the cargo before they obscure it under official secrecy." He reached for a sheet of notepaper. "Dictation, Archie." I swung the typewriter toward me. "To Mr. Saul Panzer," Wolfe began. "Subject, Vale shipping inspection. Obtain manifest copies for the vessel Aegean Star. Determine cargo category labeled machinery parts. Secure without confrontation or disclosure." I finished the paragraph, pulled the paper out, and clipped it. "You know, if you ever switched to telegrams, you could single-handedly revive Morse code." He ignored that, eyes still on the newsprint. Inspector Kramer's warning was not altruistic. He fears federal encroachment. When agencies compete, competence declines. "Kind of like ball players after beer night." He sighed. "Archie, sometimes your analogies pain me." "Only sometimes." He shot me a look, but there was that trace of tolerance he never wasted on anyone else. "Fetch the ledger of foreign consignments from the filing cabinet." I brought it. He turned pages with slow, heavy fingers until one entry stopped him. Anthony Vale Incorporated. Shipping license renewed last month under special customs dispensation, obtained by Senator Browder's office. "Political sugar," I said. "Explains why the feds are treading careful." "Indeed. Greed and governance are partners more constant than marriage." For a while he said nothing, just stared at the rain streaking down the windows. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Murder is the only currency whose exchange rate never declines." I leaned back, watching the city smear itself grey beyond the glass. "Maybe," I said, "but it still doesn't buy lunch." He glanced at the clock, 5 minutes to 1 of his sacred hours. "An epigram of dubious merit, yet apt, Fritz." From the hall came the familiar reply, "Yes, sir?" "Dinner will be prompt at 8. I shall require silence until then." That was dismissal and compliment rolled together. He turned his chair toward the window, lifting the beer as if to toast the rain. I closed the notebook, switched off the desk lamp, and headed for the door. Outside, the drizzle had softened to mist. The city looked like it was keeping its secrets for now, but not forever. I figured by tomorrow, between Vale, the feds, and the dead dock clerk, somebody would start paying interest on all this murder currency Wolfe talked about, and I'd be the guy collecting. At 4:40 that afternoon, the brownstone felt like a fortress between wars. Wolfe was behind his desk, dictating notes for Saul's next errand, while I was trying to remember what daylight looked like beyond Venetian blinds. The only sound was the slow tick of the office clock and the occasional scratch of Wolfe's fountain pen. Then the doorbell rang, one long, deliberate tone that carried importance without apology. Fritz appeared, immaculate as always. "A gentleman, sir. Mr. Rashid Karim. He insists the matter concerns Miss Marin." That name dropped like a wrench in a clock. Wolfe's head lifted. "Show him in." The man who entered could have stepped from a Casablanca newsreel. Tall, thin, and polished to within an inch of reflection, dark skin, sleek hair brushed back, a moustache trimmed with architectural precision. His grey suit hung perfectly, no rain spots, no wrinkles. Only his eyes spoiled the tailoring, black, restless, and full of calculation. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, bowing slightly. "And Mr. Goodwin, I am Rashid Karim, husband to Lydia Marin." I blinked. She didn't mention you, which I'd call inconsiderate, given her marital status and current unavailability. He ignored me, focusing on Wolfe. "My wife was killed while carrying property that belongs to me, a scarab." Wolfe leaned back, steepled his fingers, and gave him a look that could grade diamonds. "Indeed. Property, you say. Yet the scarab is presently in my keeping, as evidence of theft claimed by another, Mr. Anthony Vale. You understand, then, that asserting ownership invites contradiction." Karim smiled politely. "I expected no less. Still, I must recover it." "Your necessity," Wolfe said, "does not constitute my obligation." I'd been studying Karim's silhouette since he sat down, and something didn't sit right. The line of his jacket dipped unevenly at the ribs, too rigid for wallet, too short for spine. The faint, telltale press of a shoulder holster. Wolfe saw my glance, gave the smallest flick toward the bell cord, and spoke with deliberate calm. "Mr. Karim, before we proceed, permit me a blunt question. Were you, in fact, Miss Marin's husband, or merely her confederate?" Karim's expression didn't change. "She was both." That was all the confirmation I needed. I shifted half an inch closer. He saw it, and his right hand moved under the jacket. "Don't," I said. He paused, smiled faintly, then went for it anyway. The next 10 seconds were untidy. The chair went over first, his hand came out with a small pistol, and I caught his wrist halfway up. We hit the rug together, elbows, knees, and some inventive vocabulary. The gun went skittering toward Wolfe's desk leg. Wolfe, unflustered, tugged the bell cord twice, his version of firing a starting pistol for Fritz. Karim tried one more twist. I introduced his shoulder to the floorboards with conviction. The door opened and Fritz stepped in, eyes widening just enough to register disapproval. "Inspector Kramer is here, sir," he announced as if announcing dinner. "Of course he is," I muttered, retrieving the pistol. Kramer entered without waiting for an invitation, followed by 2 of his men, Stebbins bringing the weather, and another officer carrying a folded warrant. The room smelled suddenly of tobacco and wet wool. "Wolfe," Kramer said, cigar already working, "you've outdone yourself. I get a tip from the Gazette that an armed visitor's heading your way, and by the time I reach the door, Goodwin's holding the gun." "I prefer efficiency," Wolfe replied. "It saves repetition." Kramer's eyes landed on Karim. "Name?" The man straightened, rubbing his wrist. "Rashid Karim." "Nationality?" "British subject, born Tangier." "Sure, and I'm the Shah of Persia. Frisk him, Stebbins." They did. Aside from a silk handkerchief and a passport, nothing but the sidearm. Kramer turned to Wolfe. "You gonna tell me why your office keeps turning into Grand Central for international smugglers?" "I might," Wolfe said smoothly, "if your manners improve proportionally to your curiosity." That earned a grunt. "All right, Karim, you're coming with me till we sort this. You can argue citizenship downtown." But Karim lifted his chin. "Inspector, I have information. Lydia Marin, my wife, was killed because she carried evidence. A ledger naming every buyer and shipment in Vale's smuggling operation. She mailed it to herself under a false name 2 days before she died." That stopped Kramer's sarcasm in mid-draw. "A ledger?" "Yes. Tangier to New York. Diplomatic pouches. Antiques and jewels disguised as relief cargo. Vale is at the center." I looked at Wolfe. His eyes had narrowed to slits, gleaming. "Where," he asked softly, "did she post this letter?" "From the Empire Station branch." "And under what alias?" Eleanor Kane. He slid a small card across the desk. Change of plan, 42nd Street Library, locker 213. Kramer was scribbling. You better be right, Karim. If you're lying, I'll make you wish you'd stayed in Tangier. Karim met his glare without blinking. Truth needs no asylum, Inspector. Stebbins snorted. Yeah? It'll need a lawyer. Wolfe raised a hand. Enough. Inspector, if the man's claim is verifiable, you will find at the Post Office Dead Letter Division a package addressed to Eleanor Kane. I suggest haste before some federal hand closes over it. Kramer hesitated. You really think Vale's behind this? I think, Wolfe said, that he will soon regret misplacing his bookkeeper. For a moment Kramer studied him, torn between suspicion and reluctant trust. Then he jabbed the cigar toward me. Goodwin, you keep out of this. Last time you played hero, I needed a chiropractor after the paperwork. I'm retired from heroism, I said. It's murder that keeps calling back. He growled, waved his men to escort Karim. As they moved to the door, Karim looked back once, meeting Wolfe's eyes. You are clever, Mr. Wolfe, but cleverness without action is paralysis. Fortunately, Wolfe said, I have Mr. Goodwin for locomotion. Kramer snorted and left with his cargo. The door shut. The silence refilled the room like smoke returning to a pipe. Wolfe exhaled slowly. Archie, return the pistol to its holster and wash your hands. I detest the odour of gun oil. I placed the weapon on the desk. So now we've got a husband, a smuggler, a dead woman, and a missing ledger. All we need is a map and a brass band. He ignored the commentary, studying a speck on the rug where Karim's shoe had scuffed it. His accent, he murmured, was cultivated, but inconsistent. Educated in England, yet a trace of French cadence. I suspect mercenary origins, a courier rather than spouse. Then why claim marriage? To invoke sentiment. He hoped to trade emotion for leverage. It failed. I stretched, nursing my shoulder. Still, he managed to give us our next errand, the post office, which you will attend to in the morning. At present, orchids demand attention. That was that. He rang the bell for Fritz. Fritz entered, as unruffled as if pistol duels were a routine domestic event. Yes, sir. Bring Mr. Goodwin a beer. He has exercised himself unduly. Thanks, Pip, I said. Next time I'll install a wrestling mat. When Fritz departed, Wolfe settled back, lacing his fingers. Archie, though your approach lacked finesse, it prevented fatalities. You may one day develop discernment. Until then, brawn suffices. I grinned. Coming from you, that's practically affection. Pfui. He closed his eyes, signalling dismissal and repose. Outside, the street traffic hummed like the undercurrent of a far-off sea, and somewhere beyond it the world that had sent Rashid Karim from Tangier kept turning. Inside the brownstone, order was restored, Wolfe unmoved, orchids waiting upstairs, and me with a chilled glass and one aching shoulder to prove civilization still required maintenance. By the time I got to the 42nd Street Library the next morning, the rain had dried up, but left the air with that steamed iron smell New York wears after a good rinse. It was 11:30, and the lions out front were doing their usual job of looking bored with civilization. I'd brought along Wolfe's instructions, 3 lines, typed, signed, and smug. Locker 213, retrieve, avoid melodrama. Inside, the reading rooms were full of people pretending to improve their minds. I followed the marble corridor to the row of public lockers near the coat check, the kind that eat a nickel and burp up secrets. Locker 213 waited near the end, dented and ordinary. I fed it the coin, turned the key, and found exactly what Karim had promised. A thin brown notebook, wrapped in brown paper, neat enough to be suspicious. The cover was plain leather, the pages dense with handwriting, half Arabic, half French, with occasional English words drifting through like tourists. Numbers marched down columns beside coded initials and shipment dates. It didn't take a genius, or even me, to see it wasn't a recipe book. I slipped it into my inside pocket and headed for the exit, keeping my eyes neutral. Neutrality lasted about 12 seconds. The sedan was parked across the street, a black Packard, 2 men inside, pretending the windshield was fascinating. When I stepped out, the engine coughed awake. I started walking south, not fast enough to look hunted, not slow enough to look stupid. The Packard eased out behind me. When I reached Fifth Avenue, it turned too. My chances of casual anonymity were about as good as Fritz eating canned soup. Half a block later, a battered Plymouth rolled up beside me. The window cranked down, revealing Saul Panzer's calm face under that eternal flat cap. "Get in," he said. I didn't argue. The Packard sped up. Saul's Plymouth slowed down, blocking it at the intersection like a tired turtle with purpose. "Trouble?" he asked. "Two of them, armed with curiosity." "Fine, hold tight." He turned the corner into 39th Street, then another, pulled over and popped the hood. "Out," he said. I climbed out, confused. Now what? "Now I'm broken down," Saul said calmly, wiping imaginary grease on a rag. "Go through the alley. Second exit on the right. There's a cab stand behind the hotel. Don't wave." He didn't need to tell me twice. I ducked through the alley while Saul whistled tunelessly under the open hood. A minute later, I was in a cab, heading toward West 35th, watching the Packard roll past the intersection behind us, missing the turn. Score one for Saul's mechanical genius and my survival instinct. When I got back to the brownstone, it was 12:15. Fritz opened the door and sniffed like I'd tracked in something unsanctioned. "Mr. Wolfe is waiting." In the office, Wolfe was behind his desk, the globe lamp glowing off his forehead like a full moon. He didn't look up until I placed the notebook on the blotter. "Excellent," he said. "No gunfire, no abduction, no melodrama. Just a scenic tour of Midtown and Saul's impersonation of a carburetor crisis." "Commendable," he murmured. "Sit. We shall see what Miss Marin risked her life to secure." He opened the ledger delicately, as if it might bruise. The pages rustled like old silk. His eyes moved left to right, slow and precise. "Arabic, commercial dialect, Tangier variant," he muttered. "French annotations, numeric codes in British export format. Intriguing." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning, Archie, that this is not a simple inventory. These are transaction logs, shipment dates, customs codes, consignee initials. Note this line: Maison RV, shipment 47, pouch diplomatic. The initials correspond to Mr. Vale's export subsidiary in Casablanca. He uses diplomatic pouches to smuggle artifacts." He turned another page, tracing a finger along the margin. "And here, Lady St., Manhattan, commission secured." "Lady who?" He frowned. "Lady Susan Trevors, wife of the museum trustee. Her name appeared in last spring's social column regarding Vale's exhibition. Our Mr. Vale supplies art to patrons who pay in silence." I whistled. "So the lady of culture's buying stolen idols while hubby's chairing the ethics committee." He closed the book gently. "Civilization decorates its corruption with courtesy. Observe the pattern: money to respectability, relics to private salons, blood to rivers." "That's poetic," I said. "But what do we do about it?" "Patience. We shall confirm through the trustee's auction receipts. You will telephone Lon Cohen discreetly and ask if Lady Trevor's name has graced the Gazette Society section recently." I went to the phone, dialed, and got Lon halfway through a sandwich. "Archie," he said, "tell Wolfe the Gazette's tired of being his research department. Then tell the Gazette to bill him in Latin. Meanwhile, what's the word on Lady Susan Trevors?" He whistled softly. "Front page feature last week. Benefit gala at the Metropolitan, wearing a necklace described as ancient Egyptian motif. Why?" "Because she might have bought it wholesale from a corpse," I said, and hung up before he could argue. Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Satisfactory. The circle tightens." He turned another page of the ledger, murmuring phrases in Arabic under his breath. The glow from the lamp made his features look carved from patience. Finally he sat back, satisfied in the way a python might be after lunch. "Archie, note this entry. ST 416 transit complete. The timing coincides with the shipment Saul identified on the Aegean Star. Vale's system is elegant, artifacts disguised as cultural exchanges, routed through diplomatic pouches distributed to private collectors. Miss Marin must have decoded enough to endanger him." And he ended her instead. "Precisely." He closed the book with a soft thud. "The ledger's authenticity will be our lever. Vale's empire of civility is built on sand." I leaned back, stretching. "All right, boss. You've cracked an international smuggling code before lunch. What's next? Invade Morocco?" He lifted an eyebrow. Not while the orchids require misting. Also, my constitution forbids foreign travel. You'll need a visa for your ego anyway, I said. He allowed himself the smallest of smiles, half approval, half pity. You are incorrigible. Fetch me the red file labelled Vale Correspondence. We shall draft an invitation. To who? To Mr. Vale, naturally. One must permit the scoundrel an opportunity for eloquence before exposure. I handed him the file. You know, one of these days your idea of polite invitation's going to get us shot. That, he said, is why I retain you, Mr. Goodwin. You have the agility to dodge consequences. Fritz appeared at the doorway with a covered tray. Lunch is ready, gentlemen. Excellent, Wolfe said, rising with solemnity. The intellect functions best when nourished. Archie, bring the ledger. It shall dine with us, though it may lack appetite. I followed him to the dining room, the brown notebook tucked under my arm. Outside, the city hummed like a hive full of thieves, but inside the brownstone order ruled. Beer chilled, orchids waiting, and Wolfe already composing his next verbal ambush. If knowledge was power, he'd just cornered the market. By 9:30 that night, Manhattan had turned the colour of pewter and smelled faintly of sin and Chanel. I was halfway through typing Wolfe's notes on the Vale account when the phone gave its best impression of a death rattle. Wolfe lifted his head, one eyebrow staging a solo performance. Goodwin, he said. Sure, I answered, picking up. Wolfe's Morganex, Archie speaking. The voice that came through was Lon Cohen's, fast and grim. Archie, brace yourself. The Gazette's wires just screamed. Lady Susan Trevor's dead. Penthouse on Park, poison. Dinner party for 8. She didn't finish dessert. Kramer's on his way to you before the body's cold. I hung up and relayed the headline. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but the room's air thickened. Phooey, he said softly. Murder clothed in refinement. That is the most indecent kind. Looks like somebody's shortening Vale's Christmas list. Or lengthening the gallows, he replied. Before I could answer, the bell rang, twice, hard enough to threaten the wiring. Fritz opened the door, and Inspector Kramer stormed in like a thunderfront. He was dripping rain, cigar clamped in his teeth, coat half-buttoned. Behind him, Stebbins loomed like a wet bulldog in plain clothes. Wolfe, Kramer growled, I've had enough of your games. You and that ledger just bought me another corpse. Wolfe, calm as a cat in sun, gestured toward the red leather chair. Inspector, sit. Your blood pressure alarms me. Mr. Goodwin, beer for our guest. Kramer ignored the chair. You can save the hospitality. Lady Susan Trevor's was poisoned at dinner tonight. Cyanide derivative, administered through perfume. Guess where the bottle came from? From Mr. Vale, Wolfe said. Kramer froze mid-sentence. You knew? I infer, Wolfe corrected. Knowing would imply omniscience, which I have not yet claimed. I handed Kramer a towel for his coat. You look like you wrestled the East River. He shot me a look. Cut the jokes, Goodwin. You think this is funny? 2 bodies in 48 hours, both tied to your boss's private museum tour. I spread my hands. We're just the cheap seats, Inspector. You're the one with the warrant book. Stebbins grunted. We got one warming, don't worry. Wolfe's voice sliced through the thunder. You will not serve it here, Sergeant, unless, of course, you wish to explain to the district attorney why his star inspector sought to impede a witness rather than consult him. Kramer jabbed his cigar toward him. Don't play word games with me, Wolfe. Vale's in the clear for now. He was at the party, but so were 7 others. The poison was traced to the lady's own vanity table. Perfume samples from Cairo, Paris, Tangier. Take your pick. At the word Tangier, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Describe the bottle. Small, cut crystal, gold stopper, found tipped over beside her chair. Ah, Wolfe's tone flattened. And the odour? Kramer looked confused. Perfume. What else? Resin, Wolfe murmured. An aromatic preservative. The same compound used in embalming oils, the one found on Miss Maren's body. That pulled the plug on the conversation. Kramer blinked. You're saying both murders were connected chemically, if not socially, Wolfe finished. The resin masks the cyanide's acrid note, ingenious and vile. Whoever mixed it understood both commerce and mortality. I leaned back. Murder by eau de toilette. That's a new one. Not new, Wolfe said. merely rediscovered. The Egyptians were experts, poison as perfume, death as adornment. A civilization obsessed with preservation cannot resist embalming the living. Kramer snorted. Save the history lecture. What I need is a suspect. Then look to the one with most to gain, Wolfe said. Mr. Vale again. With Lady Trevor's dead, her private collection, and the evidence it conceals, passes under museum trusteeship, which he controls. Kramer started pacing, cigar stabbing the air. You make it sound neat. Too neat. You ever notice how every time you infer, somebody ends up dead? That is because, Wolfe said smoothly, murderers lack the courtesy to commit their crimes in proper sequence. Stebbins cracked a grin before Kramer shot him a glare. All right, Wolfe. Suppose you're right. Suppose Vale's behind both. You got proof? Proof, Wolfe said, is a luxury of policemen. I have deduction. However, if you examine the ledger's entries for the date of Lady Trevor's last auction, you will find cross-reference shipments marked ST. Those pieces, acquired through Vale, are now in her penthouse collection. Conveniently, the ledger and its possessor both vanish from public scrutiny. Kramer groaned. I'll need that ledger. You may examine it here, Wolfe said. You will not remove it. I value its integrity more than your evidence locker's humidity. I stepped in before Kramer's blood pressure could finish the job. Look, Inspector, you want coffee? Beer? Oxygen? Beer, he barked, so I don't strangle you both. Fritz entered, discreet as an angel, with 2 chilled glasses and a tray. He poured, bowed slightly, and vanished before Kramer could accuse him of smuggling. We drank in silence for a minute. Outside, thunder murmured over the Hudson. The rain on the window looked like typewriter keys tapping a death notice. Finally, Kramer said, quieter now, You think Vale used the perfume himself? No, Wolfe said. He employs intermediaries. Refinement prevents direct brutality. My guess is a chemist, one attached to his import division, someone who could synthesize the resin compound and infuse it into fragrance. Got a name? Not yet, Wolfe said, but I will. Kramer sighed, the fight ebbing. All right, Wolfe, I'll hold off the warrant for now, but if Vale skips town, it's on you. Noted. He stubbed his cigar in the ashtray like he was killing the case itself. You know, someday your habit of sitting still while the world burns is going to backfire. Wolfe regarded him mildly. I rely on the world's combustibility, Inspector. It brings clients. That earned him the faintest grin before Kramer turned to leave. Fine. Keep your damn ledger. But when you crack this, I want the phone call first. Agreed, Wolfe said. After they left, the silence filled the room like thick smoke. I closed the window an inch against the drizzle. Wolfe sat unmoving, eyes half shut, his face more shadow than skin. You're thinking poison and perfume don't mix, I said. I'm thinking, he replied, that beauty is never harmless. Those who traffic in artifice often forget that illusion kills as surely as bullets. I went to the typewriter and fed in a sheet of paper. You want a transcript for the file? Yes. Title it Murder as Aesthetic Expression. That'll wow the DA. He ignored me, drumming his fingers once. Archie, when you retrieved the ledger, did you notice residue on the binding? A little tacky, like dried varnish. Precisely, the same resin. Whoever handled it last transferred the compound through contact. That means Miss Maron's killer also touched this book after its arrival, most likely Vale's courier. And we've still got the book. Indeed. Which means our murderer is desperate. Desperation yields mistakes. He stood, a rare event, and crossed to the globe decanter. Beer? Sure. Murder makes me thirsty. He poured, handed me the glass, then resumed his seat with a sigh of finality. Tomorrow morning we shall summon Mr. Vale. His civility will not withstand inquiry. Think he'll bring a gun or a lawyer? Both, perhaps, but neither will avail him. The clock struck 11. Fritz appeared, wordless, to remind Wolfe of the hour. Orchid time was coming. Wolfe dismissed him with a nod, then turned to me. Archie, moral decay has an odour. Tonight it smells of lilac and deceit. I raised my glass. Then here's to clean air. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth surrendered half an inch. Go to bed, Archie. Tomorrow will not improve the species. I shut the typewriter, the rain whispering against the panes. Somewhere uptown, a lady in pearls had died smelling like paradise, and a fat man in a brownstone was already charting the road back to hell. You could have heated the brownstone just on Wolfe's temper that week. The steam radiators were decorative. The real boiler sat behind his desk, wrapped in a three-piece suit and moral outrage. It started at 9 Monday morning when Lon Cohen's byline graced page 2 of the Gazette. Famed detective linked to Tangier smuggling inquiry. The article was a beauty, tight, nasty, and entirely accurate in the wrong ways. It had Wolfe withholding evidence, me seen at the scene, and Kramer refusing comment. The only person it left untarnished was Fritz, probably because the Gazette feared libeling the Swiss. By 10, reporters had colonized the sidewalk like pigeons with typewriters. Flashbulbs popped through the front window every time someone passed, and one brave soul even rang the bell. Fritz handled it the civilized way. He opened the door, told them dinner was at 8, and shut it again. Wolfe sat immovable behind his desk, hands tented, lips compressed to a line that could have sliced steel. "Archie," he said at last, "your Mr. Cohen has mistaken journalism for defamation." "My Mr. Cohen," I said, "writes for a living. If he can't sell news, he'll sell adjectives." "Pfui, a man who traffics in rumour to buy influence deserves the gallows." "Sure," I said, "but you'd have to build a big one." He ignored that. "The damage is significant. The Department of Justice will now pretend moral alarm. Kramer will arrive soon, bristling with borrowed indignation, and the fools outside will persist until they are fed." That last word had meaning in Wolfe's universe. He didn't like feeding anyone unless he chose the menu. The doorbell rang at 10:40. Kramer didn't wait for Fritz. He came in like a subpoena on legs, hat, cigar, and storm cloud included. "Wolfe," he barked, "I told you to keep quiet. Now every paper in town thinks you're harbouring fugitives. The DA's office is talking about a warrant." "Let them talk," Wolfe said. "It may improve their vocabulary." Kramer glared. "This isn't a joke. I'm catching heat from the commissioner and the feds both. If that warrant lands, I can't stop it." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You rarely stop anything, Inspector. You simply collide with it." I cut in before the explosion. "Kramer, sit down. Have Fritz bring you something before your arteries stage a walkout." He stayed standing. "I'm warning you, Wolfe. If you're hiding Vale or that Tangier character—" "I am hiding no one," Wolfe said sharply. "If you wish to inspect the premises, obtain your warrant. Until then, remove your boots from my floor." For a second I thought he'd actually do it. Go get one. Then he sighed through the cigar smoke. "Fine, but the DA's office won't wait forever. You'd better get your side out fast." He turned toward the door. Wolfe stopped him with a single word. "Wait." Kramer paused. Wolfe's tone had softened just enough. "Inspector, when you next confer with your superiors, you may inform them that public hysteria serves no justice. I intend to clarify the record." Kramer gave him a long, tired look. "Just make sure you don't do it by blowing another story through Cohen. I'm already knee-deep in your clarifications." He left without slamming the door, which meant we weren't entirely damned yet. When silence returned, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Call Mr. Cohen." "Now?" "Immediately. Inform him discreetly that Mr. Vale bribed a customs official last year to secure an exhibit shipment. He is to publish it without attribution. Let the wind reverse." I whistled. "You're feeding the press poison now?" "Antidote," he corrected. "They will drink either. It is a matter of dosage." "Suppose Vale sues?" "Then he reveals his own complicity." "He will not. His lawyers prefer silence to cross-examination." I picked up the phone, got Lon's desk. He sounded jumpy, probably from counting telegrams. "Archie," he said, "don't tell me Wolfe's mad." "He's not mad," I said. "He's calculating. You might want to look into a little customs story. Word is, Anthony Vale's art shipments cleared ports faster than morals." Lon whistled. "You got proof?" "I've got oxygen," I said. "Use it while it lasts." He chuckled. "Tell Wolfe I owe him one." "Don't," I said. "He'll collect." When I hung up, Wolfe was already dictating a note on cream paper, slow and deliberate. 2. District Attorney Lawrence H. Rusk. Subject: clarification of misapprehensions. My office is at your disposal to prevent further distortion of federal investigation. Kindly telephone at your convenience. NW. I typed it, sealed it, and passed it over. You sure you want to call the DA? That's like inviting a wolf to dinner. He looked at me with that patient contempt that made me feel like the slowest chess piece on the board. Archie, when surrounded by jackals, one must roar, or appear to. A district attorney may devour rumour more efficiently than any lion. Nice, I said. You going to roar over the phone or send a telegram? He reached for the receiver. Neither. I shall speak. Words are more lethal when properly aged. He dialed, waited, then said, Mr. Rusk, Nero Wolfe speaking. I wish to assist your office in clarifying certain misapprehensions. Yes, at your earliest convenience. Indeed. He paused, listening, then nodded once. Tomorrow at 11. Excellent. He hung up, satisfied. Archie, order lunch, and notify Saul that I may require his presence. We have regained the initiative. I grinned. That's one way to put it. You sure it's not just good public relations? Reputation, Wolfe said, is merely truth rehearsed in advance. Now please, close the blinds before the reporters photograph my complexion. I did, shutting out the flashbulbs. Outside, the mob of voices buzzed like flies around jam. Inside, Wolfe poured himself a beer and finally relaxed back into his chair. He raised the glass. To self-defense by intellect, I nodded. And to the day the Gazette runs out of adjectives. He almost smiled. If civilization ever needed advertising, Nero Wolfe's dining room could have done the job. The lights were low, the linen blinding white, and Fritz's bœuf bourguignon was steaming on silver platters like an offering to Olympus. Too bad the guests weren't gods. Wolfe had arranged the seating with the care of a general planning an ambush. Anthony Vale sat directly across from him, a silver-haired banker of morality until you saw the eyes, sharp, appraising, and about as honest as a marked deck. To his right sat Rashid Karim, looking sleek and dangerous in evening black, his charm as polished as his cufflinks. Kramer occupied Wolfe's left, bulky and tight-lipped, the cigar in his fingers like a warning flare. Per our arrangement, Kramer brought Karim under guard and parked his men in the hall, badges visible enough to keep the silver honest. The final guest, Dr. Jerome Keating, a museum curator with the complexion of a mushroom and the nerves to match, sat next to me, probably wondering which fork to use in a homicide. Fritz moved silently between courses, unflappable even under the weight of tension. You could have sliced it, served it, and still had leftovers. Wolfe lifted his glass. Gentlemen, he said, I am obliged to you for accepting my invitation on such regrettably short notice. Our purpose is unpleasant but necessary, to re-establish the equilibrium of truth. Vale's voice was velvet over steel. Mr. Wolfe, if this is another of your performances, I warn you, my patience has limits. Indeed, Wolfe said mildly. So does the law. Karim smiled thinly. You Americans make law a matter of dinner conversation. An ideal setting, Wolfe replied, for exposing indigestible facts. Kramer grunted. Cut the poetry, Wolfe. We're here to hear it straight. I shall oblige. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. We are gathered because of two deaths, Miss Lydia Marin and Lady Susan Trevors. Both women perished through a resin-based poison concealed beneath civility. Both were connected by trade, the traffic of antiquities. Vale's fork froze halfway to his mouth. You're insinuating I deal in crime, sir. Insinuation is inefficient, Wolfe said. I accuse. Keating coughed into his napkin. Really, Mr. Wolfe, such directness is rare in your field, Doctor, Wolfe finished. Your museum has displayed artifacts supplied by Mr. Vale under import licenses of questionable origin. Do not protest. The ledger records each transaction. Karim's dark eyes flicked to Vale, then back to Wolfe. Ledger? What ledger? The one your late wife risked her life to preserve, Wolfe said. You were her courier in Tangier before Mr. Vale acquired both your services and your silence. Karim's voice hardened. Lydia was my wife. By coercion, Wolfe said coldly. A convenience arranged to facilitate shipment cover. When she threatened exposure, Mr. Vale chose preservation. Of his enterprise, not her. Vale slammed his palm on the table, making the wine ripple. You fat charlatan! You can't prove any of this. Sit down, Kramer said evenly. You'll have your turn. Vale didn't sit. His face had gone red, veins tight in his neck. This is slander. Wolfe merely looked at him. If it comforts you to think so, persist. However, the resin binding agent found in both victims' possessions matches samples used in your private restoration laboratory. Analysis from the city chemist will confirm it. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Then Vale laughed too loudly. Resin? Ridiculous. Do you imagine I mix poisons between lunch and ledgers? Archie Goodwin, certified trouble magnet, chose that moment to stir his coffee. You mix profit and perfume well enough. Maybe you just like variety. Vale turned on me. You? Cheap errand boy, I grinned. Better cheap than priceless and toxic. Karim spoke softly. Enough, Vale. You think you can silence everyone. Silence? Vale sneered. You wouldn't exist without my payroll. That was when Wolfe's hand twitched toward the bell cord. He didn't pull it yet, but the gesture hung like a verdict. Mr. Vale, he said, voice quiet and lethal. You mistake me. I do not argue. I expose. Permit me. He reached beside the desk. Fritz had placed a small parcel there earlier and unwrapped the brown ledger. Its worn cover gleamed faintly in the light. Miss Marin's notebook, he said. Decoded. Each entry denotes a shipment, date, destination, consignee. Here, Maison RV Vale's export firm. And here, RK, Rashid Karim. The initials dance together frequently. The choreography ends with death. Karim's composure cracked just slightly. She copied my initials without consent. Unlikely, Wolfe said. You also appear on correspondence addressed to her under Vale's dictation. Kramer leaned forward, cigar forgotten. You're saying Vale ordered both hits? Indirectly, Wolfe said. Miss Marin's threat endangered his revenue. Lady Trevor's guilt endangered his respectability. He removed both with artistry. Vale's hand went for his coat pocket. Before anyone could blink, Kramer's voice barked, Don't! Stebbins, waiting in the hall like a coiled spring, moved in and relieved Vale of a small revolver with professional disappointment. Typical, I said. Brings a gun to a dinner party. Vale slumped back, breathing hard. You've ruined me. No, Wolfe said. You ruined yourself when you confused refinement with immunity. Civilization cannot pardon murder. It merely delays recognition. Karim whispered, Then what happens to me? That, Wolfe said, depends on your candor. The law may consider coercion mitigating. Confess your part, and you may avoid the rope. Karim's eyes flickered. If I speak, he kills me. Kramer stood. Not tonight, he won't. The clock struck 8. Fritz reappeared at the doorway, calm as ever. Dessert, sir? Wolfe inclined his head. Yes, Fritz, serve it. While Fritz glided in with creme brulee, Kramer's men moved closer to Vale. The absurd contrast would have made me laugh if the air hadn't been so tight. Wolfe picked up his spoon and tapped it gently on the rim. Mr. Vale, he said, I regret the timing, but the course of justice rarely aligns with digestion. You are under arrest for conspiracy to smuggle and for the murders of Miss Lydia Marin and Lady Susan Trevors. Vale's face twisted. You'll regret this, Wolfe. You think your fat makes you untouchable. Phooey, Wolfe said, cutting him off. I think nothing of the sort. But I do think, Mr. Vale, that a man who mistakes appetite for power is doomed to starve. Kramer motioned to his men. All right, boys. Take him. They moved in. Vale struggled once, then went limp, staring at Wolfe like a man watching his empire collapse. Karim sat motionless, sweat shining on his brow. Dr. Keating rose shakily. Good heavens, he muttered. All this over relics. Over greed, Wolfe corrected. Relics were merely the decor. When they were gone, Vale, Karim, and the policeman trailing cigar smoke and triumph, silence returned like a guest who'd been waiting for dessert. Fritz cleared the plates. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled with faint satisfaction. Archie. Yeah? Remind me to have the rug cleaned. Mr. Vale's moral decay may have stained it. Sure, I said. You want the confession transcript for dessert? He opened one eye. Later. For now, coffee. As Fritz poured, Wolfe added quietly, The art of civilization, Archie, lies in concealing the savage beneath ceremony. Tonight, we have merely unmasked it. I leaned back, watching the amber light play across the empty chairs. It was the only dinner in town, I said. where dessert came with handcuffs. By the time the front door closed behind Kramer, the brownstone had started to breathe again. You could feel it, like the place had been holding its lungs for 3 days and was finally exhaling. The clock on Wolfe's desk ticked a steady 12:45. Outside, Manhattan was still awake, but the noise had faded to a tired hum, like a city too civilized to admit exhaustion. Kramer had paused on the threshold before leaving, raincoat collar turned up, cigar stub glowing faintly. He'd looked at Wolfe with an expression halfway between resentment and respect and said, "Good work, this time." Then he'd gone, the front door thudding shut behind Stebbins and Vale, who was still red-faced and furious enough to power a small generator. Now it was just us. Fritz had disappeared to the kitchen to restore civilization with coffee and something buttery. Wolfe sat back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, eyes half closed. The ledger, signed into Kramer's custody after the arrests, had left a faint dust rectangle on the blotter. What remained in its place was the scarab, the small, dark relic that had set off enough trouble to fill a week and a few morgues. I stretched on the red leather couch and cracked open a bottle of beer from the tray Fritz had left. "You know," I said, "if you'd taken up stamp collecting, Manhattan would sleep easier." Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "Pfui, stamps are for sentimentalists. This, at least, concerned value." "Sure," I said, "but the invoice came in blood." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "All commerce has its price, Archie. We merely prefer not to itemize it." For a while there was silence, the good kind, thick and companionable, the kind that comes after the world has been put back on its hook, even if it's hanging crooked. I took another sip and watched the lamplight glint off the scarab's surface. It was smaller than I remembered. Funny how objects shrink once the people tied to them are gone. "Think the museum will want it back?" I asked. "They may desire it," Wolfe said, "but they will not deserve it. Its provenance is tainted. Let the police decide its fate. The scarab will remain here until they remember its existence." "That could take months." He allowed a small grunt. "Then it will enjoy more intelligent company than it has in decades." I grinned. "That's a compliment to yourself or to me?" "To neither," he said. "To the principle of restraint. You, at least, refrained from pocketing it." I had my hands full, I said. Karim's gun, Kramer's temper, Vale's vocabulary. It was a busy night. At that, Wolfe opened his eyes and regarded me, heavy-lidded but not without warmth. "You comported yourself acceptably." "Coming from you, that's like a medal." "Do not overindulge," he said. "I may rescind it." The front door clicked faintly, the sound of Fritz securing the latch for the night. From the kitchen came the faint hum of him setting pans in order. The brownstone, always tidy, seemed to be healing itself after the evening's invasion. I got up and crossed to the desk. The scarab sat there under the lamp like a dead thing pretending to be art. "You know," I said, "Lydia Marin died trying to keep that little chunk of history safe. Funny, isn't it? How a woman who couldn't afford a decent winter coat could still manage to save civilization for a minute." Wolfe's brow furrowed. "Civilization is not preserved by sentiment, Archie. It endures because it is too inconvenient to destroy." "That's cold," he sighed. "It is factual. Sentiment has its uses, but not in business, or murder." I looked at him. "That's not what you're thinking." He tilted his head, mildly irritated. "What then am I thinking?" "That Lydia wasn't just another pawn, that she had courage, maybe even a little of the romantic foolishness you keep denying exists." He grunted. "Pfui, romance is a contagion." "Sure," I said, "but you caught it second-hand." For once he didn't snap back. The corners of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, but enough to count as a smile in Wolfe's dictionary. He lifted his glass and studied the beer's amber colour, as though testing it for philosophical content. "You are incorrigible," he said finally. "That's what keeps the lights on," I said. Fritz entered quietly then, carrying a tray with 2 plates of something delicate and French. "A little sustenance before bed, gentlemen. You have had a trying day." "Week," I corrected. "We're billing by the era now." Wolfe inclined his head. "Thank you, Fritz. Leave it." As Fritz retreated, Wolfe speared a bite without enthusiasm. He chewed, swallowed, and set the fork down. "You should sleep, Archie." "I could," I said, But then who'd keep you humble? He didn't answer. The ticking clock filled the space instead. I leaned back in my chair across from him. You know, there's something about nights like this, when the rain's stopped, the city's gone half silent, and even murder feels like an echo. Makes you wonder if anyone really learns anything. Men learn nothing, Wolfe said. They merely forget slower. Maybe, but sometimes they remember enough to do the right thing. He arched an eyebrow. You refer to Miss Maren? Among others. She acted on conscience, he said. A dangerous indulgence. Yet, he paused, commendable. That was as close to tenderness as Wolfe ever got. I let it stand. A faint breeze moved through the curtains, bringing in the smell of wet pavement and something faintly metallic, the city's own brand of incense. I glanced at the scarab again. What'll you do with it, if the cops forget? He regarded it as if it had offended him. I will not display it. Art acquired through blood is an abomination. Perhaps Theodore can deposit it among the orchids. Its hardness may be a salutary contrast to fragility. Nice. A bug among blossoms. He frowned. Your levity is misplaced. Sure, I said, but it's good for circulation. We sat that way for another 10 minutes, each lost in our own corners of thought. The brownstone creaked softly, a big, contented beast settling its bones. Somewhere upstairs, the timer for the orchid lights clicked off, a small sound, but it always made the place feel like midnight had officially been declared. Wolfe broke the silence. Archie, the world insists on confusing rarity with worth. It's a failing of every collector, whether of objects or of affections. That sounds like something for the Gazette's editorial page. Spare me. Mr. Cohen traffics in gossip, not ethics. Still, I said, you care. He eyed me narrowly. About what? About people, occasionally. Just don't let it get out. You'd ruin your reputation. His gaze softened, just enough to make me wish Kramer were there to see it. Archie, you are a fool. Yeah, I said, but I'm your fool. Regrettably, he muttered, and reached for the bell cord. Fritz reappeared, collected the trays, and vanished again with the kind of quiet efficiency that makes you wonder if he's real or just a domestic myth. The office returned to silence. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes, and for a second he looked older, like a man who'd seen too much of civilization's underbelly and was tired of cleaning up after it. I stood, stretched, and went to shut the window. The rain had stopped completely. Across the street, the glow from a street lamp caught the slick pavement, and for a moment it looked like the city was reflecting on itself. Behind me, Wolfe spoke without opening his eyes. Archie. Yeah? When Mr. Cohen calls tomorrow, inform him that justice, though belated, was served. And if he asks for details? Tell him to consult his conscience, if he can locate it. Got it. I turned back toward him. The lamplight had softened his features. His breathing was steady, the way it gets when the job's finished and the weight's been handed to someone else. Wolfe, I said quietly, you ever think about how close we get sometimes? One wrong move, one bad guess. He opened one eye. Your dramatics are unseemly. We do not gamble, we reason. Sure, I said, but reason's got lousy aim without luck. He shut his eye again. Luck is the refuge of the unprepared. Then I'll keep it as insurance, I said. I moved toward the door. You going to turn in? Presently. I wish to consider the implications of Mr. Vale's philosophy. He believed possession conferred virtue. Yeah, and look where it got him. Front page and a pair of bracelets. Precisely. At the door I paused. You know, for all your talk about reason, you still keep a shrine. He frowned. Shrine? I gestured toward the desk. That scarab. You could have handed it to Kramer hours ago, but you didn't. You kept it here, like a reminder. He said nothing for a moment. Then, a reminder perhaps, that greed ruins art, and that sentiment, though foolish, occasionally redeems it. That's almost human of you. Phooey, he said without heat. I smiled. Good night, genius. He didn't reply, but as I turned out the light, I caught a flicker at the corner of his mouth, an almost smile, hidden behind the beer glass he lifted in salute to no one in particular. The office went dim except for the soft glow of the desk lamp over the scarab. It sat there, mute, ancient, and probably laughing at us all. Upstairs, the orchids would already be asleep. Downstairs, Fritz would be wiping the last dish dry. And outside, Manhattan was pretending to be civilized again. I closed the door on it all, the click sounding like punctuation at the end of a long sentence.